Excellent. And thank you again for spending time with us this evening. Also, thank you to our listeners who will be hearing this broadcast later on, actually 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard, Eastern Daylight Time will be when this is aired live today, or aired today. Well, let me just start right off. Welcome, everyone, to the September 7th, 2012 edition of A Global Focus. Tree Sheridan speaking. The A Global Focus program is broadcast on 107.9 FM New Orleans and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. Our featured guest this week is David Griffin, researcher, writer, editor, and founder and director of Exopolitics United Kingdom, with website at exopolitics.org.uk. David Griffin is speaking today with us again from the United Kingdom, where it's late afternoon. The broadcast is going to be aired this evening. For David Griffin's bio details, impressive. David studied for a Peace Studies and Conflict Resolution degree at Bradford University. He has worked in virtual learning and learning innovation after obtaining an MSc or Master of Science in Interactive Media and Education, with emphasis on human-computer interaction. David's interest in the UFO issue began at a young age when a relative made the mistake of giving a glossy book on the topic as a birthday gift. It wasn't until 2005, however, that the UK Exopolitics site was established as the first national network outside of the US continent. Exopolitics is now well represented in most European countries. David firmly believes that the UFO framework is the only realistic way to view and discuss the complexities of today's global culture, as it incorporates a truly multidisciplinary angle with everything from anthropology, geopolitics, the sciences, psychology, and so on being key elements. David lectures on exopolitics and disclosure at conferences in the United Kingdom and abroad. His recent conference presentations include, and I'll just give the titles here, from June, Saucer School, our visiting ETs rebooting terrestrial language systems. From August, the ET and New Energy Dimension to the 1980s Falklands conflict between Britain and Argentina. August, Interfacing ET, Who Speaks for Humanity in the Contact Scenario. August 7th, Exopolitics, that was from the prior year, the first two from this year. And from August 7th, 2010, Exopolitics, Gary McKinnon and the Secret Space Program. Today we are going to be focusing on David's 2-year research, which is currently ongoing as well, into the Falklands War, possible ET connections, and a very interesting substance and also Marconi developments. We'll be going into that shortly, but just at the outset, David, what is that really intriguing crop circle that I'm noting at the UK Exopolitics site, at your Facebook site as well, the exopolitics.org.uk logo appearing on a crop circle in Wiltshire on the final day of an Exopolitics conference there.
Hi, Trace. I must just say I must do something about that bio. It's just getting too long, and we sit here for ages while it's read out. So I'm going to do it.
Sorry.
No. That's my problem. So I think you read it from my site, and there's been various ones
Yes.
used, and it just seems a bit too long for this sort of introduction. I feel a bit awkward while it's being read out sometimes. So anyway, on to the point you made. Yes, Exopolitics UK has, as many groups do now, has quite a popular and useful Facebook page. And recently, in August, we did two conferences, one ET Communications Conference, and the other one was a general exopolitics themed event where I gave the Falklands talk that we're about to go into now. But I think I get confused between the two because they were only a couple of weeks apart. I think it was after the ET Communications event, which makes it all the more pertinent given the topic. Then isn't it strange that the logo for the last 5 years that I used on the front page of the UK website, which is the so-called Merkaba symbol, is the same logo as Richard Hoagland uses to discuss his whole issue of hyperdimensional physics. Anyway, I've sort of adapted that icon and use it on the front page of the site and for various videos and other such things. And amazingly, on the last day of the conference, when we got back, someone posted on the Facebook page, and they found that I think it was Lucy Pringles, someone down in Wiltshire, our usual crop circle land where things happen all summer, and we get all these weird, wonderful crop circle designs. That exact symbol had been done into the corn by whatever means, whoever's done it, we don't know. And if you have a look at the UK Facebook page, I'll try and put a photo up on the UK website as well as the same photo, but you'll see the huge size of this thing. There's no way this was created with a couple of people stamping boards down, because you can see a what we call an articulated lorry, a huge lorry next to it, HGV, on the road beside it. And if you measure the size, then you can see that this design of this exact copy of the logo is there in the field. So that was a very interesting event, I thought, on the last day of the conference, that should appear.
Indeed, that's a very complex pattern in that crop circle. It's truly remarkable. Now, David, turning to this interview's discussion points, also, you were a guest on the Jeff Rentz program this week. Fascinating. We'd like to hear more details on this research of yours. And also, David, can I mention as well that excellent AMASH YouTube series on this presentation and its focal points, and with the hosts Joanne and Miles from AMASH. It's right now on YouTube, and it is outstanding.
Thank you, and I enjoyed doing that. That took a good... Miles and Joanne worked very hard. I've known Joanne especially. She lives very near me. I've known her for 4 or 5 years. She worked with, when I was starting the UK Exopolitics material and the website up, so went down to Miles' studio and spent a couple of days putting that together. And you mentioned the Jeff Rentz interview, and
Yes.
it's Jeff's been a big hero of mine for many years for what he's done. But I think because that interview's now up, I'll give the link that your listeners can then also go and see the slides that are up there for this interview as well. I'll give that link in a minute. But I think in our rush to get that going, Jeff didn't quite understand the fact that there is an ET component to this, as well as the Falklands War. Now, the Falklands War, of course, happened in Britain. I don't know how big that was actually I suppose it's how much you would pay attention to politics and the media in the early 80s. I was 11 years old then, but I think really Jeff wanted to concentrate on the Marconi deaths, which is something that's very famous on the internet, and that was his thing. He's always had an interest in that. So, but the point I've just made, I put a little note under the interview and basically said that really, as I'm hoping to do now with this interview, is that you need all of the components to understand the Marconi deaths, the very strange 22 Marconi deaths that happened in the UK, that I now firmly believe, I along with 2 other researchers who I've worked with for these last couple of years, I firmly believe that this was some sort of alien technology that they brought back to Britain. To understand why these deaths happened in the first place, you have to understand the context of the Falklands War, and also the issue that there was an ET base down there, and the role of a certain contactee called Alec Newell from New Zealand. Now, this, I appreciate for you also, is there's a lot to get in, especially if you're trying to do something in, say, an hour or an hour and a little bit. So I'll try and do my best this time, but let's see if we can try and do a bit more on the ET side. So I think that was what was missed in the Jeff Rentz interview. But as you mentioned, I'll just say this quickly. The Amash interview, if people want a really long, actually detailed look in this that gives quite a good picture, although the other contributors, the editors, also add in their own views, which of course the whole idea was a more informal discussion on the area, but you do get a good idea then, because of course that was nearly a 3-hour discussion, and unfortunately this topic is quite complex in some ways. So you have your work cut out, and I'll try and help as much as I can, Teresa, because I know you've only had a couple of days as well to perhaps look through some of the stuff, but I know you're very good at doing your background work very efficiently.
Well, I'll tell you, I was very much intrigued by this material. Now, of course, as you reference the Falklands War connection, the Blue ET base that's alleged that was located at Thule Island, I hope I'm correctly pronouncing it, and then material of an oil-like medium that supposedly does also contain a nanotechnology that can be activated under certain circumstances. First of all, if you could just give a very brief background, please take your time, David, on the 1982 Falklands War and the fact that, in some respects, the Thule Island which had a base, was it as of 76 above ground, and the blue ETs are alleged to have had a base from about World War One there. Um, Served as a focal point for that war, and also, if you could describe to the a contactee, Alec Newald, author of the two-volume series Coevolution, was informed that a blue race of ETs, whom he calls the Blues, actually had a base underground at Thule Island, where they were trying to de-engineer this substance, which allegedly could have a negative effect, and allegedly has had a negative effect already on some people who have come into contact with it.
Okay, I just scribbled down those points you made quickly. Yeah, you pronounced it. Thule Island is going to come up a lot in this, and you pronounced it sort of right with the German the first time. I think you said Thule. In German, if people know the sort of Nazi history, and again we're down. Don't forget, for the Falklands War, we're down very near Antarctica, which of course a lot of the Nazi stuff started happening in the 30s and right up throughout the war. Some amazing history there, if you believe a lot of the claims that were made. So it's. The Germans pronounced it Thule, I believe, and that's of course part of their Thule Society, which was their esoteric society, all to do with esoteric contact and channeling and lots of very strange things that went on. And of course the claims they had links with a certain ET group that gave them certain amounts of, certainly the saucer technology. So Thule is the German pronunciation. I think us over here, certainly Britain and America, probably I call it Thule, as you just did, Thule Island, and certainly that's the easiest way for me to pronounce that. The one other thing, just before I go on to start the main bit of the story, the first 2 points you've just mentioned, is I know that you'll probably put the link up to that, but for people listening at the moment, they'll get the link off your website. I'll just say, for anyone listening that hasn't got access to your site at the moment, then if they go to www.exopolitics.org.uk, and then they'll get the home page. They'll then see a picture of me at the conference, and you'll see there's a background image of one of the newspapers that was there in 1982. It's one famous tabloid in Britain that mentioned a very famous phrase that happened when we sank the Argentine ship, killing 350 sailors. But anyway, that's up there as a slight ironic statement. If you scroll just below that, you'll see a link that says read more. You'll then see a list of slides. Now, because this research has taken a couple of years, I've amassed an awful lot of data, a bit of Freedom of Information Act data, some correspondence with Argentinians, all sorts of things, and there's a very condensed version of that to help with radio interviews, just because it needs a sort of visual side to it. I know not everyone's going to have access to that, but if you go there anyway, you'll find that, and I'm sure you'll put the link up to help people with that as well. So yes, you mentioned let's try and do this from a different way from the way the Jeff Rent's interview went, which I tried to give the history, and Jeff, because of his interest, wanted to go back to the Marconi desk. But as I said, you need this context first of all. So a couple of years ago, I read a book and heard a talk by a not so well known, although he has written a book and he's linked to it's published by, and he's friends with Duncan Rhodes, who runs the very famous long-standing Nexus magazine. Nexus actually published his book, which, as you say, was called Coevolution. Now, as part of reading his book, his contact account, and also watching a talk, he made the briefest mention. Actually, there's very little in the book, practically nothing, because he said he didn't want to mention this issue too much. He thought it would get him into trouble. Well, I'm afraid I've brought more trouble now, maybe because I've gone into the whole thing, and he seems quite happy with it at the moment, but I think he just did not want to do that himself. People will understand that when they find out that the poor guy went to prison for 9 months, basically for not disclosing a lot of issues to do with what happened with his ET contacts. A complex story that we can't go into now. So yes, Alec Newald wrote the book Coevolution and made the merest mention of the Falkland Islands and this blue ET group, who he ended up spending 10 days on their planet. An amazing story. What I want to point out, because of course when you mention contact stories, then sometimes people start seeing things in a slightly negative light, or not necessarily our sort of community, but perhaps people a bit more on the fringes don't always take information seriously, especially in this case when you're mixing it with issues such as deeply geopolitical events, something like the Falklands War. And I want to point out that Alex is an engineer. He had no interest in the ET issue at all whatsoever. He's not your average New Age light worker type contactee. As I say, he's an engineer, and he wrote the book very reluctantly, and you can tell from the way he writes the book that he has this approach. He was astounded that he got taken, but actually adapted to it very, very well while he was on their planet, and then since wrote the book and started giving talks. I think his account will become very well known shortly after this, hopefully. So essentially, while Alec Newell was taken to this planet, they gave him a sort of potted history, as we often find with contacts accounts going back to the 50s and stuff, that they basically said, well, the few things like, well, this is how your planet's been developed, there are many intelligent visitors visiting the Earth for these reasons, for DNA, etc. However, this blue ET group, and it's interesting because they have the usual grey sort of 4.5 feet, the usual grey sort of appearance, but they're actually sort of a bluish colour. Now, interestingly, of course, if you go back and look at the Hindu Vedas, then you have constant references to blue gods, and even I think one of the early strains of humanity was a blue race that you can, if you go back and check up, you can find there are distant records of a blue human race also on the planet. So this sort of thing isn't as outrageous as it sounds. This whole idea of blue ETs are rare within the whole grey thing has taken over, but this whole idea of blue ETs isn't as far-fetched, and you can find in works such as, I've been told since the work of Dolores Callan has several people who she has spoken to and put under regression who have met a similar group of ETs. So essentially, amongst a multitude of other stuff, I'm going to try and keep this short here. They basically said, like you said, they suggested that they had been on this certain island down in the South Atlantic, and basically it's very near to Argentina and also very near to the Antarctic. It's the furthest down south. If you go onto the Exopolitics UK site, to the page that Patrice will link to, then you'll actually see a map. I'm scrolling down now. Yeah, it's the first slide up there. So what you'll see is a image of you'll see Britain in white, and you'll see Argentina and Chile coming down as usual. Then there is an inset graphic, and as part of this inset graphic you'll see the Falkland Islands, South Georgia. See, this is all familiar to us in Britain. I'm aware that I may be speaking to a wider audience, so you probably won't know these terms, but you've got these very tiny islands that Britain's had a claim to. The whole history of that as well we can't go into. Now, if you look at that chain of islands, at the bottom there's a backwards C shape that you'll see in this inset. The very bottom one of those islands is this island called Thule, and that's the one that we're going to go on about. And you're right, Therese, in so fact that you mentioned that you see the dates of the Falklands War. I mean, you can tell me after when I finish this how big you remember the Falklands War actually being media-wise in America, because America played a much bigger role than many people think. Alexander Haig and I think it's General Poindexter both did this sort of shuttle diplomacy between Argentina and Mrs. Thatcher and her cabinet in Britain, trying to, well, we don't know what they were doing. Obviously on one level they were trying to prevent the war happening. I'm putting that into quotes, but I think there may be other things going on. So once you've got the geography right, you'll see. Now, these Blue ETs claimed they needed this base to be in this position close to the Antarctic because what they were doing is de-engineering a oil-like substance that was intelligent, had contained nanites, had an intelligent nanostructure, intelligence as part of it, so it's essentially a sentient type fluid. Now, while this fluid's in very cold climates, hence where the base needed to be, excuse me, while the base is in very cold climates, while the solution is in very cold climates, it stays dormant. It's found in various parts of the Earth, as far as we know, deep under the seabed. I mean, really deep. So it has to be kept under pressure and cold. While it's like that, it remains dormant. Once it's bought and mixed with seawater and other mediums and warmth, it begins doing some very strange things. Now, if you just take the quotes that came from Alec Newell, he said they were de-engineering this substance, and they've been trying to do this. They themselves were struggling with this issue. The base had been there since World War One. Argentina knew, the upper ranks of the Argentine military knew about this. They'd obviously sort of asked permission in a certain way. Apparently America were also aware of this mission. I don't know about when. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about this. So my guess is that with our joint friendship between Britain and America, that the Britons also at some point, and I think prior to the war, knew a little bit about this. We don't know how much. The issue is the whole thing behind this nano substance that these ETs are on about. Their claim is that another race put this there when we were seeded on the planet, or another race prior to us were seeded or put on this planet. Then this nanomaterial was put deep into the layers of the Earth because it responds to frequencies. Now we can have a lot more evidence for this later on. The ET's claims it can be it responds to frequencies, and this can happen from space. So should some race come and have a war on the planet, and they lose that war, if they're that way inclined, then they can leave the planet, and from way off in space they can activate this substance by radio frequency or whatever device they use. This stuff, essentially this nano substance, then perhaps according to the commands that you give it, or when it starts mixing with seawater, we have incidences that where we think we've seen this happen. Then it becomes what many people will understand as a terraforming agent. Now terraforming, of course, is something that we're starting to do ourselves. The whole issue with chemtrails, etc., that's slightly to do with terraforming. The whole idea that many parts of the US, of course, are now deserts have been irrigated. That's a form of terraforming. So we've got a rough idea of what terraforming means, but this stuff, from what we gather, if it is a terraforming agent, is highly intelligent, and of course the danger of it is, according to this ET group, that once activated, it would essentially go through the whole planet and perhaps selectively, I don't know what, consume the biology of the planet and allow it to restart again, either destroy it or allow it to restart again in another way. And I'll just finish now by saying that one thing I thought of instead of their reason, I thought it made sense that if a group of an ET group, a federation, decided that they're going to seed something like our species on the planet. You know, we're a very strange species. We're highly creative. We seem to have DNA that ETs from all over the galaxy and further seem to come and try and get samples of, and yet we also have a very much a warlike nature, probably due to this creativity that we have. So it makes sense to me that that whoever seeded humanity would put a kill switch into the planet, and this would mean that if we went too far and we started playing with nuclear bombs as we have, and that started going too far, or we started perhaps hybridizing ourselves and other animals, and the whole experiment just went way off course, then they would decide to trigger this nanotechnology in the Earth, and essentially to me that makes perfect sense that you would do this. It's just we don't know quite how that would happen with this nanotechnology that the ETs were there and trying to deal with at that moment. So that's a basic introduction. If you can tell me what you remember about the Falklands War in America, because I was 11 years old, but I can remember a lot to do with it. If you tell me about what perhaps the average American that's maybe around our age knows, then I'll come back with a bit more and I'll decide how much to tell you about the Falklands itself.
Well, the American people did closely follow the Falklands War. We do consider our British colleagues to be colleagues and deep friends to our country. We have a close interlinked history. And I'd like to just note here two markers in your research among several that I found of interest. Number one was, and if I remember correctly, about 2 weeks after the conclusion, after the ceasefire of hostilities, there was a report that the UK sent into Thule Island, the Royal Marines to destroy the base at the upper level there, and allegedly there are reports that allegedly the SAS and the SAS Special Air Service and the SBS Special Boat Squadron visited the underground portion of the base to destroy it. What I found very intriguing were those slides you have, the video slides of the base being destroyed. It certainly seems like a tremendous amount of explosive power to be used on a base of that type. And also, you mentioned the fact that during this operation to Thule Island, such vessels were present and were participating as the HMS Yarmouth, a frigate, the HMS Endurance, an ice patrol vessel, and the HMS Oleander, a supply ship, and certainly with such very elite military groups as the Royal Marines and the SBS and SAS, that does indicate a mission of considerable importance.
It does. But let's rewind a little bit from that because we need a context for this base. So the on this Thule island, very inhospitable, only 2.5 kilometres wide. You has the ETs with their underground base, and one of the most important points for people to grasp are the dates of the Falkland War. So you've just told me that people are aware, and of course they can go and look up the Falklands War, look up the history. The important point to note is we were given the date. The war was very short, essentially a lot to do with the fact that Argentina, as happens in the perpetual war economy, as Alfred Weber calls it, then the French had sold the Argentines this Exocet missile, a devastating piece of equipment. It actually took out HMS Sheffield when they were down in the Falklands. So Mrs. Thatcher actually blackmailed, and people don't know this, I found this in a very obscure journal. This is how much the Falklands nearly went nuclear. She threatened, I mean a mad lady in a way, she threatened Mitterrand, President Mitterrand at the time, who supplied the Exocet to Argentina. She aligned 4 submarines. I've got a quote to this effect, I just haven't got it with me at the moment. She aligned 4 nuclear submarines along the coast of Argentina, and she phoned up President Mitterrand. He told this to his psychoanalyst. This is how far and obscure I had to go to get this sort of information into a book written by President Mitterrand's psychoanalyst. And he basically mentioned that Thatcher had phoned him up and said, look, if you don't give me these switch-off codes, these Exocet missiles have these switch-off codes, if you don't give me these Exocet switch-off codes to stop our ships, because we didn't stick a chance if the Exocet was allowed to launch and take out further ships, then she threatened to basically launch nuclear bombs on Argentina. So that's a sort of side note about just for people listening about how big the Falklands potentially was, despite it being a 2-month war. Now, this 2-month period between April and June 1982 is interesting because actually you're right in the fact that you mentioned 1976 as well as the base having been underground on Thule Island since World War One. Then since 1976, bizarrely, or not bizarrely, if the Argentinians understood and had been asked or had found out that these ETs had this base on Thule Island, they then also built this rather, I mean it's small, but it's a very rugged, proper, off-the-ground sort of station you find in Antarctica, hugely inhospitable, and they'd built this base there in 1976. Now, I've got to know one of the lieutenants there that supplied the base and was actually present on the base for several times. He saw the British starting way before the war started in the 80s, 1981. He used to see a helicopter fly over from one of our ice ships that was down there. But this 1976 date is important because, of course, the Falklands was meant to start in 1982. What's interesting is it was that island that triggered the start of the war, because that's when the first nuclear ships started getting sent down to that area. So you've got to ask yourself, why would would in 1976, 77, 78, why would the British decide to send a nuclear submarine down there? Simply because there was a scientific base being built on Thule Island. I mean, Thule Island it was supposedly British territory, but out of all the islands, it wasn't the Falklands. It had no citizens on. As I say, it was tiny. But the other point then is that if you then look into the history, what you find is actually not only did the war then begin in 1976, actually the war began being initiated in 1976 with this base being spotted, but the base, as you rightly point out, was actually the last act of the war. But we heard very little about this. All the ceasefire agreements for the main Falklands Islands that are many hundred miles further north of that, the two main Falkland Islands and South Georgia, the ceasefire agreements for those had been written weeks before. So 2 weeks after, we were in Britain, we were basically celebrating the fact that we got the Falklands back. As you said, and you read out the list of ships that I found, we sent this rather large squadron of ships, supply boats, and Royal Marines, and I've got some very rare footage of the Royal Marines actually going into this base. Now, on one section it looks, and as Joanne from Amash pointed out, she goes, oh, it looks like there's nothing there. The base is a bit bigger than the one shot you see. If you have a look at a few other photos, you'll see that base is actually a little bit larger. It had 14 scientific staff on, and did have a small military contingent of some sort. But you have to ask yourself, why after the war was essentially ended, did then the British send these Royal Marines in to go and take this base, and then they essentially blew it up? They didn't leave the base there. The base is blown up. You'll see this in the video, and they used a huge amount of explosives on it. I think in one issue I said C5. I got that wrong. It's obviously, I think it's called C4, but I was just making a point. It wasn't them with a welding torch taking this base down. They blew this thing to smithereens. You can literally see a mushroom cloud on these photos that I've got. So why send Royal Marines in to do the base? The scientists and the soldiers surrendered without a shot being fired, got taken away. Why do you need to do this? Apparently at the same time, and you won't find this in the normal historical literature of the Falklands, the special services then went in around about that same time, probably for weeks afterwards, located this alien base, the ET base, and actually got hold of some various forms of ET technology, which includes a sample of this nanotechnological oil type substance, which we still don't know really what to call. One important point I'll just end with there, because people really do know, people need to go and see the slides and the images to get an idea of the whole situation on this Thule Island. But one point I'll make is that apparently, because there was at the time in Argentina, there was a new military junta, probably as you know, and basically they weren't doing too well. The people weren't happy in Argentina, so the war was a bit of a diversion in its own way to get them some support. But also, what else do you get with military, when you get a sort of military dictatorship in a country? You also then get these ideas that they can then, obviously they promote themselves via war. That's how they think, that's how military generals think. And according to Alec Newell, it seems that they thought that if they then tried to take these islands back, that the ETs would then, because they were letting them use this, they had a base built above their base on this island, that the ETs would come in and support them on their side, obviously thinking that maybe if their base became exposed to the British, who were then coming to take them off the base, that the ETs would come out and defend this. And of course, as we know, ETs very rarely overtly join any sort of conflict. It's part of this whole Star Trek type first directive. So that was one of the reasons the ETs had actually left the base as the Falklands War started, and there's a whole other story to what happened to them as they went to another base that was actually based in Tibet, but that's another story. So that's the potted history of that island. But yes, I encourage your listeners to go and look at the video that I've got up there and the few slides of the condition they left the Argentinian base in, and ask why a supposedly scientific base that was just looking at weather and minerals was destroyed in that manner.
Well, very intriguing comments. It is too bad that the psychoanalyst of President Mitterrand might not have been more public in those assertions. your research continues to be fascinating. I know that, for example, you build a link between the great interest in the Antarctic. For example, 1947, as an example of 1 year of major expeditions into the Antarctic, one of the participants being our American hero, Admiral Byrd. Also, you know the number of Russian expeditions there. Also, the fact that there is drilling going on in the Antarctic and the importance of Lake Vostok and something called the Dome. Now, also, this is a bit off. I hope this isn't too disjointed for you. I was fascinated by the aspect, David, that you tried to receive a copy of the ceasefire agreements that are available online at a particular site, but you couldn't for Thule Island, and that particular agreement will not be available, the documents won't be available for 40 years. That's extremely unusual.
That's actually a very interesting point, and I literally spent, as you know, most people in the sort of exopolitics UFO field know that Britain sort of led the way in this huge amount of Ministry of Defence document releases on UFOs that essentially over the last few years, due to the amount of inquiries that happened when the Labour government brought in the Freedom of Information Act, much like America has, which Tony Blair has since said was one of the biggest mistakes of his career. I don't know why he said that, but I think it's the sheer volume of work that it brought about. But the MOD were spending so much time. This shows just, again, Therese, this shows just how popular this topic is. Because the MOD simply couldn't deal with the amount of inquiries on the UFO issue. It was overwhelming them, so they decided to put out these staged releases of all their documents, or let's say all the documents they felt they could release. So we've had these huge dumps of data all the time. So I'll mention too, I'll come to the one that you just mentioned in a moment, but one that came out in the recent batch of file releases in July 2012 actually mentions, I don't know if I have that up on the page, I'll have a scan quickly in a minute, but one of these is actually from a captain or someone, I presume someone senior in charge of the fleet sailing down towards the Falklands for the war at the time, or having got down there, and essentially they communicate back to someone in the military, in the MOD back in Britain. They're basically saying that, look, we're having huge sightings, vast sightings of strange lights in the sky as we travel down, or as we're in the Falklands area. So there was activity happening there, and that's then documented in one of these MOD releases that strangely came out just in the middle of this research, or towards the end of the research that I was doing. So that document you can probably find up on the National Archives site if you look, or I've done a screenshot or a copy of it. I think there's one on this page. I'll have a look in a minute. The document that you're on about, this is even more interesting, because unrelated to these MOD files that are being released for the UFO community, this is a totally separate thing. This is our British National Archives, where all sorts of things are kept. So anything to do with government, you can go and look up. These National Archives are held in Kew, a very nice area of London, and essentially people can either go down there, or you can now search remotely via computer. So I literally spent a week online typing in search terms such as Falklands, and I came back with a vast amount of stuff, all to do with logistics, all the discussions in Parliament. Eventually I thought, well, look, I've got to focus this down, so I started looking for the treaty agreements, because I was interested in the particular area of where these southern islands above Antarctica, where they were. Now, if I wanted the treaty agreement and the logistics and the treaty agreement between Argentina and Britain for Port Stanley, which is I think where it was signed for the main Falkland Islands. Again, people need to know the geography of this situation. Falkland Islands, several hundred miles above where the South Sandwich Islands are that we're talking about. So the Falklands aren't just a couple of islands. This whole Falklands War was to do with British territory, to do with these several islands. Now, so if I wanted the treaty for the main Falkland Islands, I could get it. If I wanted it for other areas like South Georgia and anything else to do with the Falklands War, then I could get that. I could get meetings, secret meetings in between the cabinet if I wanted that. That then had been cleared for release. However, when I came to the specific area of these, what they call these Southern Thule Islands, as a group of islands, and the slide that's on the website I cut off. I need to do another copy. When I did a screenshot of this, I I cut it off accidentally, but it essentially says these series of islands, the South Sandwich Islands and Southern Thule. So when I wanted the treaty agreement for that, and in the video that's online that you mentioned, where it shows the Royal Marines going in, you see them sat in the base on Thule before they blew it up, of course. You see lots of naval captains and Argentine senior officials signing the actual treaty agreements. Now, that's what I wanted, because I thought I'd find some clues in that. Well, what do I find? That I could order any of these treaties that I want, that I found on other areas, but when I wanted this particular one for this particular treaty, it had been sealed and closed for 40 years, so that's now not available until January 2019, whereas the vast proportion of all the others were all available. So I asked people to think about that and think, well, if this store was a load of hocus pocum, then why on earth would they make the ceasefire document for some tiny little island and a group of tiny little islands? Why would they then seal that for 40 years when the rest of the agreements to do with the Falklands are all available? So yes, you're right, that's a good point to bring up, and that document is also there to be viewed on the website.
Excellent. And to return to a prior point, I just want to quickly say, given the fact that the Exocet is supposed to be a very powerful missile, I thought that the comments regarding the psychoanalyst of President Mitterrand were very interesting. But I'm a little surprised there that he even came out with that book where that would be a client, and client confidentiality should be a major concern. But the fact that the Argentinians would have had access to an Exocet missile, that's a powerful weapon. And statistically, did many of those misfire?
No,
during the Falklands?
Absolutely none of them misfired. They took out HMS Sheffield, and I think yeah, they're hugely expensive, these things, and they were cutting edge technology at the end of the day. I'll just say that I think Mitterrand cleared. I know there is client confidentiality, but I think Mitterrand must have cleared the book. I can't see. Because obviously he left the presidency, so he must have cleared the book. I can't see the psychoanalyst would have risked being sued for that sort of thing. So, but yeah, what happened in the war? The Exocet was devastating. Mitterrand gave in to Mrs. Thatcher on the phone. She's a no messing lady, or certainly was at that time.
The Iron Lady, yes.
The Iron Lady, as they called her, and Mitterrand gave in and gave her, ironic really, if you've just sold, because at the time, just before the war, these missiles, if I remember from a documentary, were $450,000 each. This is why our taxes go on, for God's sake. $450,000 per missile. The Argentines were paired. Just before the war, when the French were very reluctant to sell them anymore, the Argentines were willing to pay $1 million per missile. These Exocets were so devastating to ships that they were fired at. What you may have been confused between another couple of issues, that again, the two bombs dropped from airplanes that didn't go off were British bought bombs. Again, this is all to do with the arms industry. You say my background's in peace studies. I studied all this sort of conflict resolution. The whole idea that Britain and America are leading war equipment producing nations, and they basically survive. The economy survives by selling devastating weapons around the globe. Well, sometimes this comes to bite us back, as with the Exocet, etc. But Britain had sold these very heavyweight £1,000 bombs to Argentina. Because their military is somewhat inexperienced, they swooped down and dropped them on our ships too low, and they relied on a certain altitude to start the triggering device off. So what happens was, two of our ships end up with holes in them, but with these huge devastating bombs on board. And when they sent in our technicians to go and defuse these, unfortunately one went off, and of course he died, and the ship was very, very badly damaged. So that's just another point again about in war. If you sell weapons to nations around the world, then of course that can come to bite you back in some way, and very, very nearly did. Had Mitterrand, my opinion is had Mitterrand not given the switch-off codes to stop these missiles being directed towards the British ships, then I think the whole outcome of the war would have been completely different. And I don't know if Thatcher would have got desperate enough to launch nuclear weapons, but that's a whole conjecture and another idea really.
Well, David, I find other aspects of your research very intriguing on this. Number one, that you were seated with a friend at some type of restaurant, and someone was overhearing your conversation on the Falklands. This individual apparently served there and mentioned unusual activity in the skies. And also, you mentioned that in '82, near the outset of the war, a giant UFO appeared above Argentinian forces.
Okay, I mean we're actually Teresa, we're attacking this quite randomly, but it's working out very well because I think we're building up a far clearer picture than I have done in previous interviews, and so this is working well at the moment, and you're picking up all the right points. So yeah, let's bring in the issue again of you've got Alec Newell, the contactee, with his story about the ETs being down there. You mentioned, which I'm not going to go into because people could go look up issues like Admiral Byrd, the mission down there,
Right.
an amazing guy, and we. As you also mentioned, I then looked into the Russians. The Russians have been going down there since 1900, but during the Cold War period in the 50s and 60s, they accelerated the amount of bases they were building down there. So we have all those aspects to it, to what's going on. And I don't know how far this issue with this technology goes back and what the awareness was. I think some of it was not to do with this technology, and there's obviously things to do with Nazi technology in other ways, but we just don't know. But as you say, because I'm trying to build a picture of this very active area for these ETs, then when I was I was a student at Bradford, and I think I'd been out somewhere. I'd been in a restaurant, and there was I must have been discussing either the Falklands at the time or UFOs. I can't remember, it's too far back. But sat on a table next to me was a man and his partner, and he suddenly looked over and he made a comment, and something along the lines of, I was down at the Falklands. He was obviously a soldier, he was a serviceman, he said, and a lot more went on down there than people realise. And I remember him pointing upwards to the sky, and he's saying a lot more went on, and he wouldn't be drawn any further, or at that time I don't think my interest was huge in this area, so I didn't then pursue the conversation. But it's one of those things that's very strange because it always stuck in my head. Hence, when the Falklands Wars come up, then I've always thought about that meeting. And of course, when a contactee like Alec Newell then claims that he was told something about the Falklands, I jumped on it and got in touch with him. So that's one incident where, of course, a British serviceman, as well as the MOD document we've mentioned before, mentions these lights in the sky that were down in that area. Just as interesting, really, is another case. I've got two cases. I'll just briefly go into those. I haven't got the details in front of me, but from memory. And this one case, the first case happened to an Argentinian just before the start of the war. So I think it was January 1982. He had no contact before with any visiting intelligences. I think he was a farmer of some sort. One day he had a UFO land in a field nearby. A series of apparently very friendly ETs got out and communicated with him, put him at ease, and essentially, to cut long story short, they then took him on their craft to a base in the Andes. Now, this is a common theme. We always hear about bases. There's definitely a lot going on in the Andes Mountains. They took him to a base in the Andes. He then goes on to describe these 3D television screens where many other of this type of ET were there watching world events. I remember him saying there was one watching New York, there's one watching some undersea goings on somewhere. A really interesting case, and I'll just mention that this guy, and I've forgotten his name, but you'll find it. You'll probably find
Yes.
it. I can perhaps find it in a minute. But essentially, the case was validated by J. Allen Hynek. This contactee he both did the Argentinian main UFO Congress, whatever they call theirs down there, their main national one, and I'm pretty sure he did the International UFO Congress at some point, because J. Allen Hynek, or whatever the equivalent was, probably in the 90s, because his story didn't come out till the 90s. But this is where his testimony gets very interesting. On his third visit to this base, this Argentine contactee was then shown on these 3D screens pictures of ice floes, soldiers fighting. He recognised that some were perhaps British and some were definitely Argentinian, and he realised that, of course, by that time the war was probably just building up a little bit, and he realised this was a future demonstration of the Falklands War. He was then told by the ETs that Britain would win the war and that his country would lose the war. But the point that was most important to me, he was also told when I had to translate all this. This wasn't available. I had to translate this from looking through from Spanish. I had to translate it from Argentinian websites that I found this stuff on. So some of the translation hasn't always been good, but I know I got this bit right. They also then told him that actually, far from being a general war or what we think wars are about, this conflict was far more about commerce and business, I think was the word they used. I think that's how the translation came out, commerce and business, than it was about war generally as we think about it. Now, that's a really important point when you come back to the point we've discovered that this oil got taken back to Marconi in Britain, because as we get to that point a bit later, then you'll find that I have a quote from one of the Marconi workers saying that actually as well as this thing doing some very strange things and causing a lot of problems for the British, it also since some absolutely amazing inventions have come, including medical science apparently from finding this technology. So I wanted to get this point out because in the Amash interview, Joanne ended by saying, well, this is all not too good, and but we never know what might come of it. It's all very interesting, but it isn't just a negative story. We've just of course we don't know a lot about this. So, but apparently some good inventions have come from this, much like any other, perhaps the Roswell crash, if that situation's true, where, as we all know, technology came from that and helped us create computers and all this other sort of stuff. So I'm sure that goes on a lot more than we realise. One more treat as well, just before then, while some Argentinian soldiers were serving actually on the Falklands before the British had got down there, a huge UFO appeared above a troop of these Argentinian soldiers, and one of their jeeps or minibuses ended up having missing time and got moved to a road further away or a field further away. So this is just backing up the whole point that there was a huge amount of ET activity down in that area, and I think it backs up the point that, because I really don't want people to think that just because the brunt of this case to do with Marconi is based on an ET contact account by Alec Newell, that I'm making the point that he's not alone in the fact that there's ET activity down in that area, and all related to this Falklands War. There was a lot of other stuff going on that I've since found out. So making that point is good, because then of course it gives the whole, when we come to the Marconi issue, then it perhaps gives a bit more credence to what we're then claiming.
Yes, and you note several sources in your research. I do have the name of that party, that Argentinian contactee, if you want me to note it, but if not, it's right. I believe the first or second segment there in that Amash, very interesting series on this matter. Also on Alec Newald, author of Coevolution. I guess there are 2 books in that series. I definitely will be reading them. Am I correct that at one point there was a question of probably an interesting circuit being introduced into his car, and that representatives from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, he claims, actually visited him. They were very intrigued about the enhancements to his car, had Jaguar.
Okay, going through those points quickly. Excuse me. He's written actually one book, and
Coevolution.
yeah, and basically there's 2 versions come out. He's updated.
Okay.
Yeah, he's updated the version. So although you'll see a slide there that I put 2 book covers on, there's just 2 versions. And I must just say at this point, while you mention Alec Newell, that I haven't done this 2 years worth of work on my own. Alec has been very helpful via email, as well as initially starting my interest in this, and also Duncan Rhodes from Nexus has been helpful with some later stages of things we might not have time to cover, but there's a whole other dimension to this thing at the end that still, let's just say this issue is still playing out until very recently in geopolitical events, as far as we can tell. But yeah, as far as let's go with Alec Newell's car. I mean, if you buy his book and read his contact account, it's pretty amazing. Essentially, as I've found in a couple of other cases you'll probably know about as well, then they don't just, Betty and Barney Hill, I believe, got out of the car and then were taken. Well, on several cases I found since then, if they're big enough craft, they seem to be able to pick up the car as well, and the people simply stop driving, and the next thing they know, they're on board a ship. But what he's since found out, I can't go too much into this, what he's since found out is that these ETs did some experiments, and essentially they ended up here by accident. I don't mean here in this, on our planet, I mean they exist in a universe that's parallel to our own. Now, this is reflected by current science. Something has happened recently. Alec Newald was telling me, he's a bit more tuned in on this than me, that we have this polarity, this quantum sort of level where you get these two opposing systems of two universes. Now, what obviously happened is a sort of technological oversight, which is classic. It always happens in contact cases, and to me it's a sign of authenticity that when they put Alec back, Alec was put back. It's a long story. Essentially, he was given a body to walk around their planet in this suit. He was given this special suit, but obviously when they put him back, they also put him back in his car, and it seems to me that I don't know whether their technology remade his car or what happened, but he was driving a Jaguar, a British Jaguar car at the time, and after the contact he had endless problems with it, and he was actually as I say, an engineer and a pretty good mechanic himself, but he couldn't solve this. He had one of the first engine management systems in a Jaguar, so it had computer components on board, and what happened is he sold this car on, and when he sold this car on, it went in for repairs, and it must have gone to Jaguar, I presume, in New Zealand, and they noticed that this engine management system circuit board was a complete mirror image of how it should be produced. So that got sent back. This is where it all gets very strange and quite exciting, actually, certainly for the British side of things. It went back to, I presume, a Jaguar in Britain. Now, Jaguar in Britain must then have got in touch with some very high up people and said, how on earth can this happen? Unless they knew a bit more about Alec Newald and had traced the car, I don't quite know. So the next thing that happens is Alec gets all the way to New Zealand, flies some people from Britain claiming they are engineers working for the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and they knock on his door and they show him identification to this effect, and they want to know questions about this circuit board and his car, and has his car been in touch with any electrical devices. They'd obviously tested it for other things, and they knew what had gone on. That's my impression, I think his impression. Now, you mentioned the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Very few people know about them, but I should have put the picture up here. I haven't had time. They operate from what's called Chatham House. This is the blue blood industry meets military meets the Queen. This is where they all exist. I have a picture of Mrs. Thatcher, Queen Elizabeth, Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan, all sat in this gold glistening room, and it's got a Chatham House logo at the bottom. So the Royal Institute of International Affairs, I think, are the British. They are the ones who deal from the British end with unusual events, both with business and commerce, but they also deal with anything that could impact on that from other worlds, strange things. It seems to be the top level, way above MI5 and other things. It seems to be a very an organisation you don't hear much about, but Alec Newald spotted the logo on their passes that they flashed at his door, and indeed checked later and found out it's very similar to it was the same as the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and interestingly enough, that is very similar, if you look online, to the crest that Queen Elizabeth currently uses. So that says something itself, that of course they're both royal organisations, and yet it involves politics and commerce, and they're interested in the UFO issue. So yeah, that's an important point. And that series, Alec Newald then he refused to tell them anything, because of course he'd had this experience. He refused to tell them anything about his contact experience. He then moved 4, 5, 6 times. He split up from his family a few years before he was essentially then on his own. He moved around New Zealand, you know, some very isolated places. He made sure he didn't leave tracks and moved. He said every time he moved house, they came and found him again, and they put more and more pressure on him to the point where he ended up in jail, as I said, for a certain point, for basically refusing to discuss certain things with them that they wanted to know about.
Thank you. Those details are very, very intriguing. Now, David, as well, I really want you to be the main focus and your work the focus definitely of this interview. I just wanted to note as well, though, that with this substance, that as you had noted in one of your interviews, it's an oil-like medium. When activated, there is a nanotechnology inherent in this material. It remains dormant when under great pressure and in great cold, in a situation of very cold temperatures. But what I found very intriguing were two references in your research. One to the fact that Britain obtained a very interesting find because of the because of a result of the Falkland War. Also, there is a reference to a Mr. X, a gentleman from South Africa, from the South African intelligence sector. I believe referencing this find, and also you have, if I remember correctly, and it's on one of your slides as well, that one of the brilliant individuals at Marconi who was working on this or had a connection noted that when the substance was switched on, there could be interference with the weather satellite, and during that brilliant Amash interview, there was a question noted of the potential for negative effects upon network stations or communications.
Yeah, okay. Well, some of that was Miles's theory from the interview on YouTube, and he's very interested, as he's a video guy and a very talented one at that. But you're right in what you're saying. Let me just give some background to this. So essentially what happened is that, of course, most people are aware of Marconi. Now, there's links with, if you go back into the history, there's links that Marconi claimed he invented the radio. Actually, I read only today that it was overturned, I think, in a United States court hearing, that, of course, Tesla actually invented the radio first. So there's always been that rivalry there. But Marconi, anyway, was the first to capitalise, and in Britain, Britain got the main first factory to build these, I presume, crystal radio sets very early on, and so Marconi became this leading global high-tech company in Britain for production of all sorts of things, and became expert in communications, of course, in satellites, in computing, numerous areas. Any high-tech area that you can think of, Marconi seemed to have a division for. Now, there are two companies. When you come to these bizarre deaths of 22 people working for Marconi that I'm going to mention, then there's also another company that, strangely enough, again, remind people of the dates when Reagan and Thatcher were about, and the war finished in '82. Interestingly, Reagan and Thatcher sort of shared the '80s, of course, as their era, and these deaths at Marconi that we're going to go on to discuss took place between 1982 and accelerated in 1986-87, and then in about 1988 started slowing down, and then just virtually finished. So there's something to bear in mind. There's a pattern going on there, of course. But it seems to me that these companies had to drag in certain members of staff from outside to try and deal with this substance. Sorry, the one point that I was going to mention as well, and there's you can find this on Wikipedia, or there's the slide up on the page, is when I say Marconi, there's also another company that it joined and merged with in 1986. This is called Plessey Industries. They were another leading military-based, highly technical company based in Britain. So I found it unusual that just at this midpoint, if this alien technology, bizarre technology, came back in 1982, then if a project, which is my theory, was going on at Marconi and had been developed to deal with this alien technology there, then you get two hugely leading firms both merging in 1986, bang in the middle of when these deaths were at their highest, and in the middle of perhaps what would be a project time scale. So you get this giant company formed under the Marconi umbrella and under the bigger umbrella then of the British General Electric Company. So
Yes.
so essentially, you've mentioned Victor Moore there now, and Mr. X. Now, there's again we need a bit of background to this. Let's okay. Mr. X is a South African intelligence agent. He's now died. He was sent to interview Alec Newell again, the ET guy from New Zealand, the ET contactee from New Zealand, and he was sent to interview him while he was in prison because they had realised that Alec Newell was a contactee, and they'd found a particular piece of ET technology. It was like, I think it'd come off a ship, and it had symbols on. And anyway, they couldn't read these symbols, and they wanted him to try and read those and translate those for him. He got to know this guy, this intelligence guy, kept very quiet, didn't say too much, but something very strange happened to him when he got given this sort of piece, I don't know whether it was a coin, medallion with these symbols on, and he had a huge knowledge download at that point. So this is at the point he then got to know this South African intelligence agent, and they sort of grew to become friends, and certainly after then Alec Newell was released from jail and started trying to get on with his life. They've since, right up till recently when he died, they've since discussed things. So Alec Newell has learned a lot more, and this is the bit that people need to perhaps understand, that if the reason why this Mr. X, the South African intelligence guy, had been in touch with Alec Newell is because a lot related to, I believe, to this nano oil substance, because one of his roles within South Africa was UFO recovery. South African intelligence, a lot of people they're called BOSS, and many people underestimate South African intelligence. They're actually a key player in world affairs. Again, their intelligence agency has always been up there and used by many other nations. So he'd also been down at the Arctic supervising this, and so one of the quotes that he gave Alec Newell was that down in the Falklands in the early 80s, the British struck gold, and by that he didn't mean gold, and he didn't certainly mean oil gold, black gold. He meant that they found this nano high technology device, and he wouldn't tell him very much more. Alec Newell's released a bit more since his death, but what was strange was that I hadn't read, there's a book called Open Verdict by Tony Collins. He's the only guy, he's a British guy, he used to work for Computer Weekly magazine. He's the one guy that's written a book, it was published in 1991, so he basically reviewed a lot of these strange deaths that happened at Marconi. Now, I'd not read his book by then, and I wasn't aware of the whole deaths list too much, I didn't know all the names, in my conversation with Alec Newell, he gave me I sent him an email and asked a question. I'm just scanning to find the right one here, and I'll read you the quote out, if my computer will behave. I've got a couple of quotes that really quite help. Okay, here we go. This is about, again, he mentioned Victor Moore to me. Now, when I read Tony Collins' book, which was only very recently, I found out about Victor Moore. Victor Moore did work for Marconi, and he's mentioned in the book by Tony Collins on these deaths. So here's the quote that Alec Newell sent me in a personal communication back in 2011. My contact in South Africa even knew one of the Marconi guys, as he studied in the UK with him years before, and then I've put in brackets that's Victor Moore. He was the one that noticed when the oil was switched on. That bit's really important. They started to get interference with their weather satellites. That's as far as we go. So we have this whole issue of links now being made between a South African guy saying he went to school or college with a British guy that he thinks worked at Marconi, who has since committed suicide, supposedly, and Alec Newell mentions his name. I then find his name in a book written about these people, and only a really passing, he's not one of the main guys, a really passing mention, very little known about Victor Moore, but the fact is there's a nice link there that sort of backs up the whole situation. Let me give you one more quote as well from this was from the first edition of Alec Newell's book, I think. This friend let slip one day, he's talking about is the South African intelligence agent. This friend let slip one day about a new robotic fluid their computer and engineer guys were working with that could be programmed with radio frequencies. They thought they might be able to use it hydraulically, which would open up all new kinds of design fields. When he asked around, nobody knew who invented it or where it might have come from, nor even any talk of patents to buy from another company. Now, if you just think about that for a moment, you
Yes.
imagine the situation that you have, that the internet wasn't invented then, of course, but we know that even in the mid-80s, then computers were used to communicate scientific intelligence data, certainly at virtually a daily light speed almost. So we're being asked to believe that between these, and they all talk to each other, these upper defense industry people, upper level scientists, upper level intelligence agents, that they all suddenly find out that something strange has turned up at Marconi. They're all networked. They're all part of their own little networks all over the world, and yet none of them can find out where this stuff's come from. Or they can't find patents for it. They don't know who brought it over to Marconi in the first place. So that says enough in itself. So this stuff just turned up and arrived. Well, I don't believe you find me another situation where that's happened, where that's, even if, imagine if this stuff had come from Russia and it was a Russian technology, well, by now we'd have heard about some Russian scientists that said, yeah, we did that back in the whenever 50s, 60s, and that's just not the case with this nano technological medium that they found. So you've got that straight away. You've got that. I don't know if I've got another quote from Victor Moore. I think there was one more.
And while you're looking for that, I just wanted to note the lack of patent material I found very intriguing. Also, I just want to make the point that, given, if as alleged, this material is as important and has the alleged potential and ramifications, no wonder people would be interested, that all sorts of parties, factions or parties would be interested in obtaining the research, all the information on it.
Yeah, sure. And what, bear in mind as well, I found the quote now, so I'll read that out in a minute. Bear in mind, Therese, what I said about, it's vitally important that this material needs to be kept under pressure and certainly needs to be kept cold. Otherwise it starts morphing, and apparently it's based on, there's some work been done into it. The rumour is that it's sort of based on gold. It has gold as part of it, but I've read, and a few people have told me, that it can morph into any structure within its chemical composition. Now, when you come down to the nanotechnological level, I don't know how that works, but I do know that nanotechnology can. I've looked up nanotechnology, and one of the things that's crucial about nanotechnology is it can rapidly, and this is really important, it can rapidly increase its size if it's programmed to do something. One of the unpredictable sides of nanotechnology, unless you've got a complete grip on programming how the stuff operates, is it can all of a sudden increase its volume and do very strange things, because of course you're down at that atomic level, and if you trigger, it's almost like a nuclear reaction, but without the heat and whatever else perhaps that goes on. You've got machines that are there making other machines. That's essentially what nanotechnology is about. And one of the dangers of nanotechnology is it can morph and suddenly form certain things depending on perhaps the environment or how it's programmed initially. I don't know enough about it, but I do know that's one of the dangers. Now, this will fit in to another episode that we won't have time to go into, but before the end, if you remind me, Therese,
Yes.
just remind me about the last document on the website to do with the Gulf of Mexico, because that explains a lot more about this, where we think we found an international situation where this stuff started actually morphing and caused a huge international problem. But we'll get to that. But anyway, so what my I'll read this. I'll read one more quote out, and then I'll go on to say about the Marconi things, because we're getting close to our time limit here. Okay. So this is another comment from Victor Moore. Comment regarding Victor Moore, the guy we've just mentioned, to Alec Newald. Okay. He also thought something. he also thought something about the job. Okay, let me get this right. This is to do with Victor Moore, and I'll tell you a bit more about Victor Moore. Don't forget, he's the guy that spotted that at a certain point they managed to switch this oil on, in quotes. I don't know what that means, to make it active. He noticed this, and then when they activated it, they found they got problems with their global satellite system. Really interesting point. So this quote is about Victor Moore. He also thought about something about the job had really been bugging his friend. He's on about Victor Moore, but he could not talk about it openly, of course. He did say, however, he was working on something, and I've put this in bold, on something outside of his field, indeed out of everyone's field at Marconi. He goes on to say, he didn't feel he was up to it or comfortable with it. He even let slip, it was, and again put this in bold, it was a little spooky what the stuff could do, even reaching into the fields of medicine, biology and nanotechnology. So again, you're going back to the the 80s and 90s when they were just looking into this stuff. And this, what it seems then, is this ET substance that they'd got had started to, they began looking at it. I think they knew a little bit about it before the war, and I don't think they knew really what they were dealing with. And so of course, as they start examining this material, as they start, quote, activating it and finding out how to activate it, then I think strange things start happening with, I think this stuff morphs into things. There's also rumours, we found out since, that in certain conditions it can make people ill. It has bizarre magnetic and anti-gravity sort of qualities. There's all sorts of things that we've rumoured to have found out about it. And so if you take yourself back to, this is one of my theories that, I mean, I went through this with Grant Cameron after a conference, that one of my takes is that since 1947, America have had the national security state. The national security state, of course, as everyone knows, was mostly set up, supposedly due to the end of the Second World War and the Cold War coming and stuff, but probably most likely due to the fact that ETs and UFOs were buzzing around, and allegedly Roswell had happened, all this sort of thing. So since that date, the Americans have had the finance and the infrastructure to create an incredibly efficient system to deal with, quote, alien technology. And by that I don't mean just alien, I mean that anything comes from another country, but also stuff that lands, crash UFOs, whatever. I think the Americans have got an absolutely perfect system virtually for dealing with that. Interestingly, we had Dan Sherman over, who worked on a project, only a minor project really as they goes for the US government, and he went through all of the security layers that he had to go to, and how it was made completely closeted off from even other elements of the military. So believe me, America have got it down to a T. My take is, despite Britain saying that yes, well, we're these world financial leaders and stuff, I don't think we were in 1982. We were having a recession, the economy wasn't great. I don't think we've taken the AT issue anywhere near as seriously than America. We haven't had to for various reasons. So my take is that because we saw the Falklands as our war, we brought this technology back and tried to deal with it ourselves, instead of as they would over in the States, being able to pass this on to a series of perhaps scientists and technicians in the military or whoever, who could then deal with it in a certain way. As a rush, what Britain then did, at Marconi, is they began employing people from outside, basically from what we call over here Civvy Street. So when you then look at the list that I've put up on the website, or you can find online, of these scientists and their job descriptions, you'll find that bizarrely they employ initially a computer programmer, a very experienced computer programmer from Essex University called Keith Bowden. He's the first one that dies quite early on. The date there's a bit out with the Falklands War, but I have my own theories for that. The second person to die is a senior official from Anthony Goddard from the Royal College of Military Science. He's literally in 1982-83. These are the first two to go in bizarre deaths. Let's remember, all these aren't like aren't like they died of old age. These are really suspicious, bizarre deaths. What you then find when you look through these Marconi deaths, as I spent weeks and months doing, is you then see that, well, a couple of years later, bizarrely, a couple of Asian very talented computer scientists that they brought into Marconi then also got killed in an absolutely bizarre situation. Both these young programmers, both 23, 24, one very happy about to get married. You suddenly find that for some reason they move all the way from sort of London, or I think the south, certainly the south east of Britain, and go to Bristol, totally opposite side of the country. Okay, and get this, of these two young optimistic computer programmers, again working on this project as I'm assuming for Marconi, one ties a rope around his neck and rope around a lamppost or a tree, then gets in his car and allegedly puts his foot to the floor and of course pulls his own head off. That's one situation. The other guy, the other Asian programmer, also disappeared to Bristol, and he ends up throwing himself off the Bristol Suspension Bridge, which is a huge bridge going over a river in Bristol, south west of England. He was then found at the coroner's report. He was found with a puncture mark in his buttock, one of his buttocks. So of course, foul play certainly was something going on there, most probably. What you also have to add in, because we haven't got time to go through all these deaths, although they're very interesting, people can have a look and read for them themselves. What you also find is that these two guys from Bristol, the young computer programmers, had 2 days of missing time. Now, completely bizarre, when they came to the coroner's reports, don't forget, 22 of these deaths, so all over the country, wherever these deaths happened, they had to involve police, coroners, and all these inquests kept having to happen. Most of them they got control of, and hence they were all ruled, well, many were ruled as suicide. Very strange the way that's absolutely bizarre deaths that newspapers at the time looked into, and yet they got ruled as suicide in most cases. But the missing time is a very strange element, and it happened in a couple of the other cases. And of course, if you're a coroner, you have to account for the last few days' movement of someone that died, and they couldn't do that. So I'll briefly say that although I'm not a huge, I know that mind control exists out there. I never jump to that as our first conclusion. I think too many people do that, especially on internet conspiracy forums. I tend to steer away from that myself personally. But I don't think that. I think a lot of these deaths were done by, let's say, agents for our government, or but I think there may have been some high technology involved in perhaps programming these people to do certain things themselves, because there are several cases where they're just too bizarre to have been set up by someone else. And this whole idea of missing time when people just disappear seems a bit weird. So I don't know. That's one guess. I'll give you one other example. David Sands, I think, was a guy working for Marconi Systems in some form. I'll get the list up in a minute. It depends how long you've got left to go. If you want to do another 5-10 minutes, Trees, we can go through a few more of the deaths. What do you want to do time wise?
That would be wonderful. And I was intrigued by by your past comment, that one of the individuals' vehicle was found to have had the tires changed and the brakes tampered with.
Okay, let's go for that one. That's I mean, there's I'll just get the list up here. But I know that one already. That is Keith Bowden, and he again he was the impressive computer programmer specialist from Essex. He was a professor from Essex University, and essentially his wife was that shocked. I think he was not a drinker, or he certainly wasn't a drinker and driver, according to his relatives. And he was found splashed with alcohol, apparently having drunk, with his car in a ditch, crashed dead. His wife was so shocked at this, that this guy didn't behave like this. As I've said in previous interviews, these are all people that are part of either very early computer programming, which is quite, a very that time in the early 80s, very new discipline. You've got very quiet sort of people, defence industry, academics, usually very rigid sort of disciplined people. They don't kill themselves in these bizarre manners, and they certainly, although there's pressure within defence industry jobs, then I'm sure their families know when people are going under pressure, and would know if someone was going drinking and driving. Well, anyway, she was so shocked at his death that she called in a private investigator herself, and he went to he managed to get access to the car that Keith Bowden was driving, and he found that the tyres were bald, they'd been changed. She knew when the last what we call over here, I don't know if they're called in America, MOT inspection, the vehicle inspection had been done, and the tyres were totally different to that. And I think something else on it, the brakes, something else on the car had also been tampered with. There's a similar case of another scientist that happens. Let's scroll and try and find his. Let's try and find his date. But anyway, I think his name was David Sands. But a lot of people have heard about this one. He essentially was driving home one day and just so happened to have his the trunk, as you call it in the States, the boot as we call it over here. He had it full of propane gas canisters. Now, why an engineer? Let me try. I'm trying to find his. There's such a list up here that I struggle to find these people. I was trying to find the job that he was actually doing at research. Let's have a look.
Yes, those references to propane in the car or the boot. I think two different victims there were quite upsetting.
Right.
Horrifying.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make the point that why would a person with his background, Russell Smith, Trevor Knight, John Furry, that's a bit. No, can't find it. But anyway, the point is, why would someone be carrying a boot full of propane? Of course, that exploded on impact, and he died. And actually, at that time, so foul play had not been ruled out at that point. So a lot of these, as is the title of Tony Collins's book on the deaths, is called were given open verdicts. So a lot of them were, it seems, where there was control over the police and the coroner, then they were given suicides, even though most of them were absolutely bizarre and obviously weren't suicides. And in other cases, then a verdict was left opened. The other interesting case about the 22 deaths is especially so in the case of the two Asian programmers that were brought over to this country. Their relatives and lots of relatives were told that they could not attend the inquest. It was in their best interest not to attend the actual inquest of their dead relative. Well, this is absolutely unheard of. The whole idea of an inquest is that they have the family members there, that discuss state of mind, the last movements of the person. That's the whole idea of the inquest, and yet the families, certainly of the two young Asian computer programmers, were told not to turn up to the inquest, and of course they thought that was the way that things were done, and they agreed and didn't do that. And I think that happened in a couple of other cases. You get difficult people, such as the first guy who wouldn't believe. This happened in a couple of cases. Wouldn't believe that her husband had drunk driven and killed himself by driving into a ditch. So she forced a lot of this and brought in this private investigator, etc. So you have all this. So people can go and look at the deaths up for themselves and see just what I'm on about. What I've done, if you go and look at the Exopolitics UK website and find the page of slides, you'll see that what I've done is they're listed in date order. There's three slides of them, and you'll see that these dates move and they go up in a certain pattern. And as I just mentioned previously, they peak around 1987 and then they die off in sort of 88. Now, my theory is that of course, this alien artifact came back from the Falklands War, was very unpredictable. Several things went wrong. A, they didn't know what they were dealing with. They didn't have the infrastructure like perhaps the US would to deal with such a strange technology. And I think they had to bring people in that they wouldn't normally bring in from out. So these people weren't written into military ethics of secrecy. This is what I'm saying. So they brought in these Civvy Street programmers and scientists, and these people perhaps because it was so unusual, they had to what over in the States you say they had to be read into the program. And if you have to tell people, well, look, we've got this very strange substance, and perhaps it starts when they examine it and it starts doing very strange things. If you've had to tell them that's well, where's this come from? I know about this, and you have to perhaps admit a little bit more, or the nature of the substance you're meant to be working on is a bit too strange. Then you may not want to take that job. But by that time, you've already been briefed and interviewed on what is a highly classified military project. So if you then refuse to do that project, they're faced with a dilemma. Well, he's going to go away and tell people, or we've now told him too much, or the people are so shocked this is what I think happened with the computer programmers. They were told to perhaps try and learn how to interface with this nano substance, and I think, you know, whether they got scared off with what it could do, or whether they were young and began talking about it with each other or with other people. But whatever happens, something happened, and it was like a virus around Marconi, that these people began dying like flies. Another example, a guy who worked expert in communications technology, gets uncomfortable with his job, starts complaining that he doesn't want to work on this certain project anymore, and so he gets given a job over in some part of Africa, and it involves working with a communication device, satellite or something, way up high on a hotel, and he ends up jumping off or being pushed off, depending on how you want to view that. So they go on and they go on, and so that's my take on it. Basically, is that Britain wasn't ready for this, or this material did very strange things, and it spread. The people started talking about it, and they had to eventually take these people out, and they did it in a variety of ways. But what I think is they perhaps did the first few in such a way, these were sent out, the British are very good at killing people quietly, believe it. You know, we taught your CIA in the Second World War many of our tricks, and the British, if they don't want people to know about a death, you just disappear. These were done in such a way as to make people in Marconi and the military pay attention and say, do not talk about this project. That's why they were done in this manner, I believe. You know, and that's really my take on what happened at Marconi. And this, you have to remember, this Marconi list has been going around since the late 80s. It was even on early bulletin board systems before the internet was about, and no one's really put anything together. Star Wars defense has been mentioned. There's something to do with that. Tony Collins said it was to do with Cold War spying and other such things, technological secrecy. Well, I think, given what we found out from the ET side of things, I think here we find perhaps an answer to the Marconi deaths. So I'll leave it there, and if you want any more closing remarks, then I'll leave that to you to define.
Yes, David, I'll be brief. Two questions here. Number one, on the Blues, who allegedly, per Newall's accounts, are de-engineering the substance. This will be an important aspect of research as to who are the Blue ETs and what is their true agenda. Are they presenting themselves? Are they presenting their activities as they are? Also, you know that this oil is not am I pronouncing it correctly, an abiotic oil. It is not an abiotic oil.
Okay, scribbling those points down. Also, I'll just write the last point down that I remember to make about the last document on the at the end of the web page. Okay, right. Well, really, I mean, I think I should give credit here to Alec Newell, and I'm not. He's not a great one for publicising his book. You can go visit his website, and he does a blog, and he says a bit about this. You can find descriptions about his journey online. So just type in Alec Newell and the ET contacts, and you'll find some information. But essentially, it seems like this race it was a mixed race. So there were these blue ETs, but when he got taken on board, excuse me, this ship, he was greeted by a female hybrid who then took him to what was one of their home planets, which they terraformed themselves. And this planet was an amazing place. Everything was organic. Houses were built like shells formations, totally feng shuied, as we'd say, but also were intelligent and responded to you. You literally spoke to your house like a pet. They'd got pyramids there that channeled energy into the earth, so that's how they supplied the earth with its own energy. Very tuned into the cosmos. A highly scientific race. I can't go into the whole discussion about they'd gone wrong in their evolution, and had essentially tried to accelerate themselves up into light bodies, into another dimension. I don't understand all this, and it had gone wrong, and they were now trying to engineer things back in some way. But this race, a very benevolent, a hugely advanced race, given that really they were the one. if you go to, and in fact, if you watch one of my other talks, I have used Alec Newell's description of how he communicates when he first gets on board. Now, alien communication is one of my interests. When he meets these blue ET groups, when his car gets taken, he thinks he's died. He thinks he's had a car crash. But what then happens is he finds he can guide himself round by his mind. He then he goes into this machine and gets given this blue suit, and he gets a body and finds he can start moving around. But the communication between these people, he beautifully illustrates it. Again, for someone who claims he's not that articulate, can't tell stories, and it comes from an engineering background, he talks about a tapestry of sounds. Now, this is my area of interest. I'm interested in visual language, telepathy, all to do with the ET issue. I've done many talks on this area, and he makes an amazing description of this. So he says they sing in harmony, and they don't sing. The communication comes in a harmony of colour and sound and light and vision, all this sort of thing, all the stuff that I'm interested in. So his account is fascinating. The whole history of the blue ETs, like I say, they seem to be mixing with, there was in charge of the ship was this guy called the Elder, who he also met very briefly, but on board the ship there were all sorts of, this was a huge ship, there were all sorts of races, and they essentially stopped off at a couple of other planets on the way. So they seem to be, as many ETs, are very, very advanced, because I've read a lot of contact literature, and compared to some, these seem to be a highly advanced spacefaring race that's literally go around the galaxy, maybe different universes, and have various planets which they then are looking after or using observations on, etc. So you go and read Alex's book. He even does an ebook online that you can get. If you want to read it immediately, you can get the ebook for $15, I think, published by Nexus magazine. The other point which you make, which is really important, and I made on Jeff Rentz last night because I wanted to make this point, is that we have, since this whole issue of peak oil came around, then we have this issue of abiotic oil. Now, abiotic oil came around again as a conspiracy theory, but now seems to be true. And again, the Russians, bizarrely, just as it's been quoted that the Russians are ahead on this oil thing, that we think they may have found it in Siberia or Antarctica before anyone else, but they haven't got as far as perhaps the British and everyone else at engineering this stuff for their own benefit. That may not be the case. I don't know, but they were also ahead on this thing called abiotic oil, which involves drilling very deeply to this certain layer. Some people claim all oil is abiotic, and it's simply the whole idea that it comes from dissolved dinosaurs has been a scam to maintain the whole price structure, which would make sense, to keep the price artificially high instead of this stuff that replenishes itself. Some people claim all oil is abiotic. Others claim that there's a separate abiotic oil that you have to drill deeper for to find, and that this isn't made from the same substance and it replenishes itself. Now, one of my ideas that I discussed with Duncan from Nexus magazine is maybe as this stuff was in these, perhaps before the 80s, before the Falklands War, maybe as people, the governments and intelligence agents and oil companies got to know about this nano oil that was beneath the earth at certain points, because we haven't gone on to discuss other areas yet where certain things have happened. Maybe there's been some confusion between abiotic oil and this substance, and that the two, because there's been disinformation put out, that the confusion has gone on between this substance called abiotic oil that, again, remember, magically replenishes itself, and this other stuff that we found, this black intelligent nano type oil that somehow seems to morph when it gets released into seawater and other mediums. It seems to morph and rapidly expand and dissolve things and all sorts of stuff. So we've had several instances where certain things have happened where maybe the two have got confused. There was a case recently in Israel where they had to ground all of their aeroplanes because the oil had a certain film start appearing on it, and they had to clean out all their tanks. This has never happened before. The Gulf of Mexico we can't come on to, but I asked people, you can either have me back on to discuss this because we could do another hour on it, or if not, where I'm now, I've spent a long time talking to a few people about this. On a certain website, a discussion was had about an international standoff incident, allegedly posted by a French diplomat's boyfriend on a computer that had access to these emergency channels. This was a few weeks after the Gulf down near you, the Gulf Horizon oil disaster. There was no less than, I think it was around 10 or 11 different submarines from different nationalities, and essentially the French were trying to get a sample of this oil, and now we're talking about the oil, the nano oil. The French were trying to get a hold of this oil, and we get a real-time readout of what went at play. This is a document that it's a compressed version by Nexus magazine. You can get the PDF free at my website, but you need to take time to read through this. Also, bear in mind when you read this, I've since found out a lot more about it. You don't take everything at face value. It seems there were certain information was being given at layered elements to certain people. This was indeed people from the intelligence community and the RAND Corporation, if people know where they are, disclosing this international incident, and indeed it was true, because someone I know has been over and spoken to the person who he actually traced the first poster of this, and I think has spoken to him and met one of the key people involved. Literally flew and went and met one of the key people involved in this whole scenario, and he swears this guy is from a think tank background and the whole situation is true. So that's a new aspect to the whole Deepwater Horizon Gulf of Mexico oil spill, which is fascinating. And if you want to have me back to do a second hour on that, I can give you probably information you won't get anywhere else on that. But believe me, you need to read the document first and read it with an open mind. But you will find, if you've listened to the interview that we've just done carefully, if your listeners have listened carefully to this, or play it a couple of times and then go and read that document, you will find out that in 2010, I believe this very substance, this very ET substance, caused an international incident, and a very severe international incident. Like I say, if you want to have me back, I'll come and do one final chat on that. Other than that, people can read that document, and happy to email me and I'll answer any questions if I get time to do so.
David, your time with us today has been so appreciated. And yes, I had read some of that material. To me, it presents an interesting case where international groups joined together to make sure that the safety of different vessels was preserved. And this would be a number of international parties making sure that these vessels safely were able to remove themselves from the area, and were able to just continue on in safety, both the crew and the vessels themselves. International cooperation. Now, David, also when you return, I'd love to as well hear about ET's rebooting terrestrial language. We did go into that a little bit during the first interview on the program just a couple of months ago. Also, your idea of who is the advocate for humanity in this new field of exopolitics, and also, again, the important geopolitical and other aspects of exopolitics and field research in general. I so appreciate your time today.
Okay, well, I'm happy to do any of that, whether you want me to come and do the last part of this episode, or whether you want me to do any of the others, or all three, then just let me know, and we'll hook up.
That sounds wonderful.
But thank you for your time.
Thank you again, David, and I wish you a wonderful weekend. We thank our listeners for joining us. And again, David, thank you so much for spending